This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Ryan Tripp with you here on a Wednesday. A little bit of a holiday week shift here as we get you set not only for Turkey Day, Tripp, but also the final regular season weekend in college football. We have some college football playoff rankings to react to. We got them just hours ago on Tuesday night. We have a big time week 14 slate that can determine right now really one of the final weekends to set the playoff field. We had some interesting questions here as well. Do a little bit of a look back on the regular season to see if it's gone as the way we've thought so far. Tripp, man, this is going to be a really fun show, but it's also crazy to think we are just days away from the regular season concluding. Where did this time go?
I am not sure. I have to ask you a question, though. What is your perfect plate on Thanksgiving? What do you have on your perfect Thanksgiving plate?
You want to make enemies right away, huh? I'll preface with this. My food tastes are unique. I understand I'm very picky, and so people will probably get mad. I hate Thanksgiving food. So my perfect plate on a holiday like this is mac and cheese, mashed potatoes, stuffing, no raisins, not a raisin guy at all. Please leave those out. And maybe like a biscuit or something like that. Not a big turkey guy, not a big ham guy. So if you go traditional Thanksgiving cuisine, I'll go very carb heavy, as you can tell.
Cornbread, stuffing, a little potato casserole, maybe some sweet potatoes in there. Not a big turkey guy either. I prefer chicken over turkey. And then for dessert, you got to have some apple pie. That's my go-to Thanksgiving plate. But I think it's more, as you said, the carbs, the sides, the leftovers of consuming those sides day after day after day. That's the part that I love about Thanksgiving. And I think it's great that we're recording this on a Wednesday, right? A lot of people traveling today, a chance to listen to the pod on a Wednesday. And then really this weekend slate starts Friday as opposed to Saturday. There's a couple big games on Friday this week, but I can't wait to dive in. And then getting the rankings last night, I think everyone was looking, at least everyone in the Big Ten. You kind of knew Oregon, Ohio State. Maybe there was a little debate. You're looking on social media with Notre Dame because of their dominant wins against the academies. Would they have enough steam to jump Penn State? Don't think they deserve to. Ended up not. But where would Indiana go? And the Hoosiers drop to number 10. But really, that spot becomes the last at-large spot available for the college football playoff. So they drop 5 spots, Indiana, to number 10 after their loss in Columbus.
And you would think, Tripp, right? Okay, you're at number 10. You're 2 spots away from the last 2, bids to get in. Initially, I thought, they're locking. Like, okay, they dropped from 5 to 10. I think the drop is fair considering you lost on the road to 3 touchdowns. And it has mirrored previous drops from other teams have lost. And then I started to think about it. I'm like, okay, they're a lock. And then I'm like, all right, what could happen this weekend? What could happen potentially on conference championship weekend that could maybe bump Indiana out? Because you're right. Even though they're 10, when you look at it with Boise State 11 and the Big 12 champ 12, they're the last at-large bid. And so that means if you get a bid seal, if you get an upset this weekend, who's out? Well, Boise State is not out. They're in. The Big 12 champ's not out. They're in. Well, then all of a sudden you look at number 10 in Indiana. Well, they could be on the short side, a short end of the stick here and getting bumped out. And I think there are a few scenarios, Tripp, Indiana fans have to look at here this weekend and possibly next weekend as well to help ensure that their team is in. This one, if you want to look at this weekend, right? I think the big matchup that kind of people are circling, Clemson, South Carolina. Both teams ranked in the top 20. Clemson, forget about them for a second. If Miami loses, Clemson's in the ACC title game. South Carolina at 8-3 is trying to just get another signature win. They're playing some good football here the last few weeks. It is now, I don't think either will get in over Indiana, Tripp, but it is a discussion to where the winner is going to have a strong case. And if you're Clemson with another, with a top 20 victory and you're sitting there at 10-2, whether you're in the ACC title game or not, people will be banging on the drum as they sit there at number 12 for them to get in. It's going to be interesting.
I think the big thing for Indiana fans is they want the ACC outside of Clemson. They want someone to get upset. They don't want the ACC to serve hold here because if Miami and SMU win, they're both in the conference championship game, which means they're not going to drop below Indiana. One of those teams loses. If Clemson makes the conference championship game in the ACC, Indiana's fine because either SMU or Miami are going to fall out of the playoff picture. I think right now, my only beef, I have a couple of things this week with the rankings. I think Indiana probably deserves to be 9 instead of 10. They probably deserve to be in front of SMU if you look at strength of schedule, playing in the conference that Indiana does. Their only loss being on the road in Columbus. I think they probably deserve to be 9 instead of 10, but that's kind of splitting hairs. For me, the scenario that I'm most watching is the SEC. And obviously, South Carolina has a 3-loss team. That Clemson-South Carolina game's interesting and bears watching to see what they would do with one of those teams getting a quality win. But it's Texas A&M. If Texas A&M runs the table, beats Texas a 2-loss team, would they drop Texas from 3 to basically out of the field as a 2-loss team? If you look at the resume, I think there's some merit for them to really consider doing that. Now, I don't think they would. But if Texas A&M defeats Texas and then defeats Georgia in the SEC championship game, Texas A&M is in as the number 2 seed as the SEC champion.
As a 3-loss SEC champ.
Texas A&M is in. But then also, you got to assume that the committee is also still, even though Georgia's 3rd loss would come in the SEC championship game, they're not going to knock
Georgia's
Georgia
not getting
out.
bounced. They're not.
Nope. And then Texas, would they bounce Texas as a 2-loss team? I think that's the scenario that is most precarious for Indiana, is Texas A&M running the table and stealing a bid, because that they truly would be a bid stealer. They're not in. That's the one. That's the one. I mean, you could go on all sorts of crazy scenarios. If Texas A&M beats Texas, would they then, the same thing we're talking about with South? I don't think so. But to me, that's the scenario for Indiana that creates the most chaos, is Texas A&M essentially stealing a bid as a 3-loss champion in the SEC and running the table the rest of the way.
And you look at it, to your question is, right, would they drop Texas from 3 to 13? Would they drop Texas from 3 to out of the rankings if they lose on the road to A&M? I don't think they would. And I think that's the one doomsday scenario for Indiana.
They probably deserve to be.
I agree.
But at this point, I mean, all of the national narrative, and here's, this is a side conversation, but you start reading about the rankings last night, and everyone has an opinion on it. I think it's actually good for college football because so many people are talking about it. The debate right now is, are there even 12 teams that merit playoff consideration? Well, that's why we have this new format. So even if you have a hiccup or two and you feel like you're one of the best teams in the country, you still have a chance to compete for a national championship. Do you deserve it? I don't know. That's a discussion for another day. But the conversation right now is credit the SEC, because they are controlling the media narrative surrounding the college football playoff. And they have so many analysts and people with a voice in the sport in their corner going to bat for the conference. And I think that, number one, it is an outstanding conference with outstanding football, outstanding fan bases, history, tradition, postseason success. There is no doubt the SEC is a grind week in and week out. However, this year, you have teams that have 2, 3, 4 losses. I'm sorry. You have to win your games. I have no problem with 2-loss Georgia being where they are in the field right now. I don't. But we can't just keep making excuses and saying, well, hypothetically, the SEC would beat the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12 teams, because they've lost games this year that teams deserving of playoff and national championship consideration don't do. And it's happened this year, but they have every big name in sports media, and this is where the power of ESPN comes in. The ESPN personalities, Josh Pate, Paul Feinbaum, like they have all these people in their corners where Nicole Auerbach, who works for NBC, which is a Big Ten rights holder. I know it's an NBC, Notre Dame's an NBC property too, but she's beating the Notre Dame drum now. Where is someone from the Big Ten that has, we're pretty powerful here on Still Enrolled, but where is someone with a national voice? Where is Rob Stone, Urban Meyer, Joel Klatt? Where are the people from CBS? Where is someone with a national voice? And maybe we're living in our own little isolated world for those of us that consume whether it's Blue Sky, X, Instagram, TikTok, I don't care where you're consuming your, but our little like social media bubble, and we think everyone's reading the same things we are, and that's the narrative that's going to be spun. But where are the personalities from the rights holders of the Big Ten, Fox and CBS? They need to use their platform, and the Big Ten needs to empower them to use their platform, to use their voice, to advocate for the teams that they're covering every single week, because I think that can be very impactful when it comes to this national narrative that's being spun about some of the teams in the Big Ten right now. Ultimately, the committee has spoken, and there's still 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10 of the college football playoff rankings.
Right.
That's what matters most. That's ultimately what matters most. But someone with a powerful voice in the college football media landscape needs to speak on behalf of the Big Ten.
I'm sort of half joking, but also kind of serious when I say this. The most powerful Big Ten voice right now on ESPN is the same guy that advocated for Indiana last week to sit their quarterback, Joey Galloway. So you want to talk about a 3-loss South Carolina team, people beating the drum for this team to be in, and a 2-loss Texas team should be in, and all the 10 SEC teams should be in. And then here's the one Big Ten voice. And you know what? Indiana, sit your quarterback, because I don't want Florida State to happen again to you 2.0. Again, it's a little, I'm being a little dramatic, but also part of it is kind of true of just like that. That's the conversation now we're having about Indiana, instead of kind of showing how good they are. It's maybe let's just kind of play it safe. Let's just kind of have a loser mentality. Not great. So if you're an Indiana fan, I think the 3 results you have to look at here, Trip, I would say the Clemson South Carolina game, root for South Carolina, because I think it's harder to make a case for a 9-3 Gamecocks team over a 10-2 Clemson team, even though Clemson's played nobody this year. We've seen, again, brand bias. Indiana knows that is powerful. I don't think a 10-2 Clemson team said there are 12 would jump Indiana. Just don't take any chances. I think it would also help Indiana if USC beats Notre Dame, because I think at 10-2 Notre Dame is out, and then just creates a little bit more breathing room. And then to your point, I'm with you. Root for Texas. Hook them. Root for Texas here to knock A&M out and really solidify 3 SEC teams in Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee. Make it, and that's it. If you get through those 3 results, forget about what happens next weekend on championship weekend. You are in. It's a lock, and start now planning your flights and looking to where to go. Speaking of which, Trip, you asked this question. I think it's a lot of fun here, as we now are finally 2 weeks away. So it's really starting to feel real now, right? Some of these matchups and what we're looking at here. And you asked the question, what would be some of the best playoff matchups you could see from the Big Ten? And so I'm going to ask you, I want to start. If you're Oregon, I know, right, for the most part, they have the first round bye if they are able to beat Ohio State here. But if you look at it from Oregon's perspective, is there a matchup, a team that you look at that would say, oh, this would be tremendous? The Ducks can find them and face this team at some point in the playoff?
Are you talking about a favorable matchup or a matchup that fans would like to see the most? Because when I look at the bracket last night, Oregon, number 1. Yeah, you got it right there. Perfect. It's on the screen for those of you following on YouTube that are watching and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is the benefit of that. But Oregon at number 1 would play the winner of Georgia, the 8 seed, or 9 seed Tennessee. Meanwhile, Ohio State, as the 5 seed, would play 12th seeded Arizona State, and then 4th seeded Boise State in a neutral site game. So Ohio State would host Arizona State, then play Boise State. Ryan, I'd look at that, and I would say Ohio State has an easier road to the national semifinal than Oregon does. And I would say the same about 6th seeded Penn State playing at home against Indiana, and then having to play Miami in a neutral site game. I think it actually, based on the bracket, I think it's more favorable for Ohio State and Penn State than the number 1 seed Big Ten champion, just because the SEC, and here we are. I am going to tip my cap. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're playing SMU, Indiana, Boise, Miami, the non-Big Ten, non-AC, or the non-Big Ten, non-SEC teams, I think you have to feel better about your matchups, just how it falls, than playing the SEC opponent. So for Penn State and Ohio State, all of a sudden you look at that, and I think there's a very viable path to a national semifinal for each of those schools if the bracket from last night would hold. But that's where I think it gets really interesting when people start talking about, well, would you flip Penn State and Notre Dame? Would you flip Tennessee and Indiana? That's where, the first, your path to, you start looking instead of just how do you get through that first game, but what does your path start to look like? And in that bracket last night, I think you could legitimately argue the 3 best teams are on the same side of the bracket: Oregon, Ohio State, and Georgia.
Absolutely. Oh, I could not agree more. And that's why I'm with you of just like you look at Ohio State and Penn State's path, like that is by like if this stays the way it is, which is far from a guarantee, it's still 2 weeks to go. I think we will see a lot of changes. You're right. Oregon has easily the shortest end of the stick because whether it's Tennessee or Georgia, those are two of the most dangerous, maybe not consistent, but in terms of talent and matchup wise, two of the toughest. With that said, and I don't disagree, so I'm not going to belabor.
Can I add one thing?
Much. Sure.
I want to add one thing. I think right now the most important thing is to be the 5th or 6th seed.
Do you think that's more important than having a bye? Because it is one less game you have to play, so you're healthier, and it's again, it is college football. We have seen this. I saw the spreads last night. I think Ohio State would be like a 21-point favorite over Arizona State if that's the matchup that happens. I don't think the Buckeyes would lose that, but Arizona State's hot, and again, we've seen a lot of parity in college football. Do you think having the 5th seed, which is a home game, and you're risking it, but you'll be probably a heavy favorite, right, against whoever it is, Boise State, Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, whoever it may be. Is it worth being a heavy favorite at home and playing that game and risking losing over being guaranteed a spot in the quarterfinal?
I think if you're the 5th seed, yes, because you're guaranteed to play the Big 12 champion or the Group of 5 team in the quarterfinal then. And I think whoever's the 5th seed is going to get the easiest path to the college football playoff semifinals. It's just the 6th seed is interesting because you never know who that matchup could be based on the projected brackets the last couple of weeks. But I think I would tend to say yes. The way I think I have to say yes, that you would avoid, maybe not because of the first round matchup as much, but just because of what you would play in that 6-3 game and the 5-4 game. That's the most favorable second. If your goal is to get to the national semifinals and you're telling those teams that you have an opportunity to play the Group of 5 team, the Big 12 champion, or the ACC champion in your second round game and not playing another Big 10 team or maybe the top dog or one of the top 2 teams, no pun intended, out of the SEC, I think you have to say yes, that having the 5th or 6th seed is better than being the number 1 team with the bye. Is that outlandish?
No. Again, we're looking at the bracket right now. I'm with you. I'd much rather be Ohio State and play Arizona State and Boise State than be Oregon and have to face the winner of Georgia, Tennessee, where Georgia's very inconsistent. But we've seen Georgia on a good day. They could be the best team. Like, they have the talent where they put it together. They could be great. That's a tough matchup.
Let me ask you this right now. If this was the bracket, what would your national semifinals look like? Just real quick.
So I would put Ohio State. I think Oregon would beat Georgia. So I think you could have a Final Four of Oregon and Ohio State for the 3rd time. I would feel good about, honestly, Penn State making it. And I would say Texas. Okay. I think we could see Texas, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. You see, was that 3 Big 10 teams and an SEC team? I'd say right now that's where it goes. You have any disagreements there?
No, I feel the same. I feel like Texas, Notre Dame's played really well. I'm really intrigued by what's going to happen this weekend out in Los Angeles, how they look against USC. I think Texas, Notre Dame would be a toss-up. I think Miami, Penn State would be a toss-up, but I would probably lean with your picks there as well. That would be my Final Four.
And you see the bottom half of the bracket. If Texas is able to beat Georgia, which the first time we saw that was a nightmare, I think Texas is more vulnerable than Georgia is. And so you look at if you're 6, if you're 7, and it's okay, well, we got to face either Miami or Texas versus playing it is really fascinating. And I would agree with you this year with how the bracket looks. That 5 seed, which looks to be, I feel pretty confident in this, right? It will be either Oregon or Ohio State. The loser of the Big 10 championship game will be there number 5. You got to feel great. And it's a weird dynamic, right? Where you're going for a conference championship and you lose, usually you're pretty sad. This may be the only year and the only situation where if you lose the Big 10 title game, that fan base can be more excited than the team that wins. It is really fascinating to see. With that,
back to your original question, though, I want to answer that that bracket last night, while I think it is beneficial to the Big 10, as a college football fan, sure, no matter what the path may be, I want to see an SEC team playing in the snow in Happy Valley. I want to see an SEC team playing in the sun. I want to see an ACC team playing in the snow in Columbus, Ohio. like those matchups, while yes, it's a playoff, they're not going to do huge ratings. They're not. They don't have the sex appeal that Notre Dame, Penn State in the first round does. They don't have the appeal that Tennessee visiting Ohio State in Columbus does. It's not an Ole Miss coming to Bloomington, Indiana. That I'll say that with the SEC losing last week and having a bad weekend, taking some of the big names out of it, SMU, Indiana, Arizona State, and then seeing an SEC rematch in the first round, that doesn't move the needle to me. The intrigue factor of a college football playoff kind of goes down without those big brand names matching up in the first round.
In terms of like fan, like what would be fun, I would agree. Like it would be great to see Alabama go to Happy Valley. It would be great to see, Georgia go on the road to Columbus. With that said, though, I think it would be it would not be at a home game or a home setting for the most part here, but I think it would be exciting to see Oregon face off against Georgia again. You look at, obviously, Dan Lanier coming from Georgia. The last time they matched up, 49-3, 2 years ago to start the season. And Oregon's come a long way since that ass whooping. But how about even like Indiana? Like you talk about like fun matchups, where to go. I think Indiana, if they match up against an SEC team, they go on the road to Tennessee. Wouldn't that just be great? For all the yelling SEC fans have done, I think it'd be so picture perfect for Indiana to go to Rocky Top, knock off Tennessee. I hope they plant. I don't know if they do it. Plant the flag in the middle of the 50-yard line and let everyone know not only are we here, shut up. Like that would to me, you talk about intrigue. I think that could be one of those matchups where if you get Indiana going on the road to an SEC team, which most likely looks to be Tennessee, would be the only right now SEC team that would host. I think that would be a really fun matchup and an intriguing matchup.
It'd be really interesting. I don't know that it would go well for the Hoosiers, but it would be really, really interesting. I'm not out on Indiana after last weekend. I'm not out on them, but I am concerned how much they got pushed around. I think they were dominant in the trenches against teams that they were better than, but to get pushed around the way they did in Columbus and then to not have, they didn't have any answer at the skill positions, where Ohio State, you could see not just the skill positions, but downs and some of their big guys in that game. Indiana never had an answer. And I think that's concerning when you start to look at the caliber of talent they could be going against in the college football. Every roster they're going against in the playoff is going to resemble Ohio State's if it's a Big Ten or SEC team.
All right, Trip, let's take a look back here and kind of look at the Big Ten here. So you kind of look, we're last weekend of the regular season. You see 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10, 5 in the top 25. When you go back, right, and let's pretend we're in August here for a second. We fast forward. It's all right. You're going to have 4 top 10 teams, 5 in the top 25. Would you have said that that's a success, disappointment? How would you have judged so far how this Big Ten season has gone? Take team names out of it. Just the numbers pure. 4 top 10, 5 in the top 25. Success, what you kind of thought so far?
Yeah, I think to have 3 teams and 3 teams you thought, I know, take names out of it, but the 3 teams you thought, Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State, to be in the top 4, you have to say that it's a resounding success for the Big Ten. To be sitting here last week of the regular season and have 3 of the top 4 teams in the country is obviously a successful season for your league. I think 5 in the top 25 is not bad. I'm surprised maybe there wasn't 1 or 2 more kind of in that hunt. I think the disappointing thing for the conference is Illinois has struggled to get into the top 25. They're there now, but you don't have a USC, Washington, Michigan, Minnesota, Rutgers, Nebraska. No one else is really knocking on that door. So I think, yes, upper echelon by far and away, successful year for the Big Ten. As you break down those numbers, I feel like the Big Ten's about where you would think. Let me add one more. 12 of 18 teams bowl eligible with a chance to get it to 14 of 18 bowl eligible. That's pretty darn good. So I think overall, absolutely a successful year. The one knock would be you don't have any more of those tier 2 teams in there. You just need a Minnesota, a Michigan, a Washington, someone else in that pack that you'd have maybe 1 or 2 teams in the top 25 or that have been fluctuating in and out of it during the course of the year.
You are right. It has been a little bit of a bummer just to kind of see a big line of delineation where for the most part from 5 on down, again, Illinois has cracked the top 25 recently, but it's been a huge mixture where each week it feels like we're talking about who the fifth best team is. We've named Illinois, we've named Minnesota, we've named USC, we've named Michigan. And like we have probably named through 13 weeks, 6,
I
7
put
teams.
Iowa in there.
Iowa,
Rutgers, Nebraska have been in there.
Yeah. Like it has totally fluctuated every week, which is again, I think the sign of a healthy conference. I don't think you want, 5 teams at the top and everyone else at the bottom and no one in the middle. The middle's been very strong for the Big Ten. The problem is they beat each other up so much, and you play 9 conference games. The records don't reflect that as much as you could. But I'm with you. Like when you say take names out of it, just this is 4 top 10, 5 in the top 25. That would go as anticipated. I didn't really expect, I didn't really know what to know from USC. Going in, I didn't think they'd be this bad, but they felt like the biggest enigma. I'm with you. I'd say right now the Big Ten is a resounding success so far. Now, obviously, we'll see how the playoff shakes out. But so far in the regular season, I think it's gone in terms of just numbers as anticipated.
And when you bring another name, when you actually take the anonymous factor out of it and put the names up, to have an Indiana team elevate itself from preseason projected 17th in the league, a program you don't think about, to now I think you're going to have to think about Indiana and consider them a contender in the league year in and year out moving forward. Maybe not for Big Ten championships, national championships, but obviously they're a team that is a force to be reckoned with. And they're now going to be in that pack. If you look this year, teams that are ascending, I think you're seeing teams that are lower in the conference. They know what they have to do to compete in this league. That's why there's pressure at USC. That's why there's pressure at Nebraska. That's why there's pressure at Wisconsin right now. Iowa, there's a little bit of pressure. Minnesota's had the same thing because it is number one, the field is more open. So there's more opportunities for you to make a playoff at 12 teams. It's not, I don't feel like we have a chance. You're never going to make it to the top 4. But number 2, when you have so many great teams, and I think one of the questions is, what would you consider to be the elite programs in college football? I think it's a very small group. I think it has fluctuated a little between like 5, 6, 7 teams over the last 10 years. Right now, for me, I think it's only 4. I think it's Alabama. I think it's Georgia. I think it's Ohio State. And I think it's Oregon. I think those are the 4 elite teams in college football right now. But what can you do? I just named that. 2 of those are in the Big Ten. And a team that I would have put in there 6 months ago was the University of Michigan. And that's another Big Ten team. And you start to look at this landscape, and there's times where you'd consider putting USC in that mix as well. How do teams in this conference where you have 3, 4, 5, 6 programs that are obviously blue bloods, but considered college football's elite, you have to make a concerted effort to compete at the highest level. And I think that's where you see schools, even like Northwestern with what they've done with their stadium project. Purdue, Ryan Walters is going to be out at Purdue. They're going to need to make an immediate change there. Indiana, Kurt Cignetti, and investing $8 million in their head coach. Programs across the Big Ten are going to feel the need to elevate their programs to be maybe not compete with the elite, but at least be in the same ballpark with them. And I think that's where the revenue that this mega conference brings in should support programs. Those middle tier, lower tier programs should support and elevate them moving forward. And that probably doesn't get talked about enough.
No, you're right. The conference is definitely trending up. Like you said, there's reason for optimism for what? 10, 12 programs in the next 2 or 3 years, like immediate.
When you saw this, and it's interesting, and I think there's a little bit of a correlation there, is I covered women's volleyball, and I think it's one of the fastest growing sports in popularity in the country right now, especially particularly in women's sports. Women's sports we've seen take off. Everyone wants to talk about women's basketball with Caitlin Clark. Women's volleyball has really ascended. Their national championships now are broadcast on ABC. Popularity of the sport has grown immensely, but Penn State was the dominant team in the Big Ten for a really, really long time, going back to the 90s, 2000s, especially middle 2000s with Russ Rose and the team winning 4 consecutive national championships. They won 109 straight matches at one point. But when they were the elite and no one else was there, it forced every other program in the Big Ten to invest in the sport to bring the floor up. Now, not everyone has gotten to Penn State and national championship level, but in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nebraska, obviously the new West Coast team, but now there's a lot of Purdue. There's other teams that are at the same competition level as them. I think you see a little bit of that, and you're going to, with the money increase for
Right.
your Purdue's, Illinois, Rutgers, Maryland. They're going to have to do it too. You're going to see that in the Big Ten in football, and I think that is something that doesn't get talked about enough. But you said it. There's optimism for a lot of teams in this league that they could be the next Indiana.
High tide raises all boats, right? And for a lot of the bitching about Fox noon kickoff, right, and the early kickoff times, Big Ten's got a lot of money for that. And you know what? You're going to see that money, like you said, Indiana's investing. There's a lot of investment going on from schools that normally wouldn't do it, have a lot more money than otherwise usually did from their football program to now have them, like I said, raise their floor and be more consistent than normal.
And when there's more competitive teams, when Michigan's not in a down year, when Iowa's not in a down year, when Michigan State, they're trying to bury somewhere so you don't have to watch their games. That is when Ohio State won't play 6 consecutive noon games and 5 of 6 on Fox Big Noon Kickoff, because Fox Big Noon Kickoff will have more teams to pick from to put on. That's the problem this year. They've really, CBS and NBC and Fox, they've had the pick of Ohio State and Penn State for basically CBS and Fox, and then Oregon's on the West Coast. So they're going to tend to slot into the 3:30 or the 7:30 time slots. That's what's hurt the Big Ten this year, is that outside of Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana, Fox hasn't had anyone to pick from that's going to draw ratings in a marquee window.
And even Indiana, only really the last month or so did they get the attention they deserved, and that's when Fox started putting them on a little bit more frequently.
Yeah.
But like even then, like they were slow on the come up here, and you're right. And that's, like I said, it seems like that will change, and obviously that's good for everybody. Makes the conference harder, which I think now makes it more tougher to go undefeated like Oregon so far, or one loss with Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana. But I think it also makes make it fun as well. Speaking of finishing strong, Trip, let's give you some regular season finale picks here. Week 14, which teams can go into the offseason? Which teams can go into the postseason here on a strong note? Black Friday does have a few games here, and you make a nice little note here. I think this is important. We are going to see, for probably the first full weekend, some Big Ten weather impact some of these games. You write it down here. 7 Big Ten games out of the slate here, expected the temperature to be 30 degrees or lower. If you're going to any of these games over the weekend, bundle up. It is going to be cold for really the first time all season. See how that weather does impact one of the games that will be freezing, I'm sure. Paul Bunyan's axe on the line Friday, noon Eastern, CBS. Minnesota 6-5 on the year, going to Wisconsin, who's 5-6. This is one of those games, Trip, right? You really need some optimism if you're Luke Fickell going to the offseason here. Becoming bowl eligible would do that, because Wisconsin at home get that elusive 6th victory.
Whew, man.
I know.
They have so many injuries right now on defense. Hunter Wohler, not sure about his status. Jake Chaney's trying to play, their linebacker. If they both don't play, Wisconsin would be without 2 of their top 3 tacklers on defense. But there's so much at stake for them. That 22-year FBS bowl streak. Wisconsin, though, 91st in run defense. And I thought Minnesota ran the ball really well last week against Penn State with Darius Taylor. I like Minnesota. I thought they played well last week. I think they're a more complete team than Wisconsin. I think Brosmer's played well enough to win. I don't think he's spectacular, but he's kind of pulling all the right strings there, not making big mistakes. Minnesota is a more complete football team right now. I like Minnesota in this game just because they're more complete, even with everything Wisconsin has on the line. Too many injuries, too much uncertainty with that defense. I'll take the Gophers.
Everything you just said, I can't disagree with. I think on paper, Minnesota has the advantage. They should win. I'm taking Wisconsin, though, at home. I just think the emotional factor. I think there's just so much pressure on Luke Fickell and this program to get over the hump and win. I think they come out more desperate. Not that PJ Fleck's team won't play hard. That's what they do consistently. I just think that level of desperation, that fire under their butt is going to be so strong that I think at home they do enough to overcome some injuries and some matchup problems. I think they squeak out a victory here. They do become bowl eligible and barely get by Minnesota. Iowa at home, Heroes Trophy on the line as they are hosting Nebraska, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC. Iowa has dominated this matchup recently here. Trip, winners of 8 of the last 9 against the Cornhuskers. Is there a layoff or a hangover here, maybe better say, after Nebraska clinched bowl eligibility last week? Was this kind of kickstart them, and now all of a sudden they're just a runaway train that can't be stopped.
Well, not Iowa has won 8 of the last 9, but the last 6 have all been decided by one score. I think with Iowa down to Jackson Stratton at quarterback, who played serviceable in his debut, right? 10 for 14, 76 yards. The reliance on Caleb Johnson and the run game, I don't think they'll be able to run the ball against the Nebraska defense enough. Nebraska's defense, 21st nationally, 111 rush yards allowed per game against. I like Nebraska on the road in Iowa City, where Iowa is unbeaten at home in Big Ten play this year. I like Nebraska to stay hot. I like the Huskers.
What you just said is why I'm taking Iowa. They're unbeaten at home. They're a different team at home compared to the road. The spread is 6 in favor of Iowa. I think Nebraska covers that, and I agree that you see another one-score game here. I think Iowa, though, gets a turnover. Raiola has been a little loose with the ball. I think they get a turnover. Home field, Kinnick Stadium at night, really tough to go in on the road and win. I think Iowa squeaks out a win here at home. Again, maybe 3 points, 23-20. They win. They go to 8-4 on the season, and Nebraska drops, I think, to 6-6.
Can I just say what that would mean?
Sure.
What that would mean if Dylan Raiola can go into that environment against that defense at the end of the year, what that back-to-back, make a bowl, and then win it in that environment, the feel of Nebraska's season would change completely if they could go on the road against that defense and Raiola plays well and that offense plays well for Nebraska. This is a game with implications for them that could really carry over into the offseason.
That's a great point. That, again, we just talked about momentum, right? That would be, I'm with you. That would be huge for this program right now. And I think it would help build expectations for 2025 and beyond. Speaking of expectation, Trip, a lot of people thought a lot of Ohio State this year, and so far they have delivered. Michigan, there's some hope, and right now that's not really lived to the case so far. 6-5 on the year. The Wolverines are going to the shoe, take on Ohio State, the game of rivalry in which recently Michigan has dominated, right? Winners of the last 3, as I'm sure every Ohio State fan knows. Ohio State, 21-point favorites. On Monday's pod, you were feeling optimistic, maybe a little frisky about Michigan making this a game. Where are your feelings now, Trip, as we start to circle in on this game? How you feel about Michigan going into this one?
I think Ohio State's makeshift offensive line will be challenged more this week with the talent of Michigan than they were last week by Indiana. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Can they get pressure on Will Howard and make him uncomfortable? Michigan obviously has a stout run defense, 4th in yards per game allowed on the season. However, if you look big picture, the results are the results, right? Michigan allowed 31 to Texas, 24 against USC, 38 against Oregon. It's a secondary that has struggled this year. It's depleted. We don't know if Will Johnson is going to play in this game. I think Michigan can get a little pressure on Howard, maybe contain the Ohio State run game, but ultimately at some point in this game, Egbuka, Smith, Tate, Ohio State's going to make some big plays. Michigan may have been competitive in Bloomington, but Indiana's defense held them to 206 yards of offense. Even if Michigan can hold Ohio State somewhere in the 24, 28 point range, I don't think against that Ohio State defense, how is a one-dimensional Michigan offense going to get anywhere near 20 points? You figure they're going to have to get to at least 20 to have a chance. I don't think they'll sniff 20 points in the game. So as frisky as I may have been on the podcast on Monday, I am no longer flirting with an upset. I think it's Ohio State convincing over Michigan, and the Buckeyes will play for a Big Ten championship.
Convincing enough to cover the 3-touchdown spread? Like, do you think it's
a lot? That's a lot in a rivalry game with 2 pretty good defenses. That's a good question. Yeah, 27-3, Ohio State.
I think they cover in part just because, like, you look at Ohio State's defense last week. I mean, Ohio State's offense wasn't great, by the way, against Indiana. They got the benefit of a special team touchdown and some short fields because of their defense, but that defense was all over Indiana's offense. Yeah. Like you outlined, Michigan's offense this year has really struggled. Despite what we saw last week, I don't think they'll be able to move the ball whatsoever. And I think with all the frustration, all the noise that Ohio State has heard the last 3 years, they're at home. I think they run up the score late. Like, I think this is ugly. You saw last week the quarterback sneak, which I don't know if you have a problem with. We didn't really mention too much. The quarterback sneak late in the game.
60-minute game.
Stop them if you're Indiana. You don't want them to celebrate. I think we could see a running up the score big time. I think Ohio State drops a 40 on the board. I think this just gets out of hand and it gets ugly.
You mentioned the offensive numbers, maybe not spectacular. Ohio State's offense, not spectacular last week, but you start to look at the numbers now for Will Howard, right? 2,600 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 121 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns rushing. Team's 10-1, ranked number 2 in the country. He leads the nation with a 74% completion percentage. He's second in pass efficiency, 7th in passing touchdowns. But no one's talking about him for. I'm not saying he's a favorite and should win the Heisman Trophy, and he's got a ton of talent around him in a great scheme. But if you're going to talk about Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward and all those quarterbacks that are Curtis Rourke and put him in the top 10 of your Heisman rankings, Will Howard deserves a little bit more love for them.
I mean, you sent me this.
His performance is really being undervalued.
I'm with you. And you sent me this from On3, their Heisman poll.
Yep.
Now, this is On3. This is one media company. This is not the official Heisman ballot here. But their top 10, Travis Hunter, Ashton Genty, Cam Ward, Dylan Gabriel, Tyler Warren, Kevin Jennings of SMU, Dylan Sampson of Tennessee, Riley Leonard of Notre Dame, Cam Scadaboo of Arizona State, Curtis Rourke of Indiana. I'm with you. How is Will Howard not
I don't
on
know
this
that. I don't know that he's a top 5, but how's he not on the list somewhere? Come on, give the guy a little respect.
To Riley Leonard,
He's been disrespected.
Had a tremendous
he's being disrespected.
Even Curtis Rourke. I mean, look, not to boil it down to one game, but I mean,
it's disrespectful.
I agree.
It's disrespectful.
And I give you a lot of credit, Trip. You were beating this drum now for it feels like a month on Will Howard. I think you've been early and right on it, and I'm with you. Like, again, does he deserve to get invited to New York? No, but to not be in a top 10 list is ridiculous.
I know he has a ton of talent around him. Other players on that list do too. But what he's done with their offensive line.
Good point.
There's some merit there. Quarterback has to make the calls, make the right plays, not turn the ball over a ton. He deserves some more credit. And I think his performance is being overshadowed and for some reason undervalued because just kind of like, okay, he's just in that offense.
And despite the talent you have in the run game, he's leading the way. He threw for over 300 yards against Oregon. He won the Penn State game with his arm a little bit, also with his legs as well. And even the Indiana game, they couldn't run the ball at all. He started 16 for 16. It was like, or 14. Like he was unbelievable. They've had to put it on. There's not a lot of balance for Ohio State in these big games, and he's showed out so far. I agree with you. I agree. Maybe this game against Michigan, albeit, again, not a great opponent, but a lot of eyes on this game. Maybe we'll create some momentum next week against Oregon if you can have another similar output. Maybe we're talking about him now, again, in the mix. Not saying you should go to New York, but I'm with you. At least to not be on the radar is absolutely ridiculous. How about on the radar here for Illinois, Trip? 8-3, a 9-win season here, potentially in the books for Illinois, number 24 or number 23 in the country. They do come in at the latest college football playoff rankings. They go to Wrigley Field, taking on Northwestern, who got curb stomped last week by Michigan. Illinois 7.5-point favorite as the Land of Lincoln Trophy is on the line. Who you got?
Illinois.
I agree. I do agree. The only thing that's interesting, Illinois' defense last week did get gashed by Ethan Kylie McManus on the ground, which is a little surprising. He's not that mobile of a quarterback. He had over 80 yards rushing. Rutgers as a team had over 200 yards rushing. Jack Lausch is mobile. He can make some plays with his legs. Not enough, though, to win or cover. Illinois 7.5-point favorites. I'm assuming you agree with me here. Illinois wins and covers.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Nice. And what should be, by the way, a home atmosphere for Illinois at Wrigley Field. We kind of saw the Ohio State similar. Game you will be at on the sidelines for Penn State, number 4 in the country, hosting Maryland. Penn State 25.5-point favorites here. Trip. I'll ask you this because I've not looked at the weather for Penn State specifically here. What are we looking at? How cold are you going to be?
Yeah, we're looking at highs in the mid-20s with wind, real feel somewhere in the teens, probably 16, 17 degrees. It looks like the sun may be out at kickoff. Obviously, it'll get dark sometime late first quarter, early second quarter, maybe some flurries. I will be bundled up on the sideline in Happy Valley, like any other sideline reporter across the Big Ten this week. But I will definitely be bundled up there. And really, I think right now the conversation about this game hasn't happened. I think this is where what's the key here? Penn State still needs to take care of its business against Maryland, because everyone now, after you got through Minnesota, everyone's saying, you're in, you're in, you're in. 25.5-point favorites. A Maryland team, they should beat. Billy Edwards Jr. missed most of the game with a hand injury. Yeah, Maryland's got Edwards and Felton. Penn State should dominate. Penn State should dominate the game. It's a team they have dominated as well, but you still have to show up and play the game. That's the most important thing.
The one area, because I would agree, I'm looking at for Penn State is the run attack, right? We've talked a lot about the receivers in the past. They got to step up, make some plays. The rushing attack low-key has struggled, Trip, for Penn State for now almost half the season. They're averaging, coming into this game, just shy of 200 yards per game. They're 192. You look at the last 7 games, they've been below that rushing average of 192 in 5 of their last 7 games. They have struggled to run the ball consistently. Last week against Minnesota, not a very good run defense whatsoever. Penn State's running backs, when Singleton and Allen, they struggled. They had less than 100 yards combined. They've not played very well recently here. I think if you're Penn State, again, the opponent, it's Maryland. Are they going to put up a good fight in terms of the run defense? No. But I think it is important for you to establish the run and try to get back to that, because that has been an area Penn State has struggled with now, trying to consistently get 4, 5, 6 yards at a time from their running backs. And if you want to talk about, going deep in the playoff, you got to be able to run the ball.
And they struggled in short yardage situations last weekend against Minnesota. They were 1 for 11 in that game on third downs. I agree with you. I think Singleton, though, looks the healthiest he's been. I think he should get more touches back there for Penn State. They've got a good combination of Singleton and Allen. Both have different features, but I still feel like this is where you're going to see Singleton, as he gets healthier, continue to ascend. For Penn State, also of a concern is the injuries, right? Anthony Donko, long-term injury, starting tackle. They have Nolan Rucci, but Donko's an excellent, excellent run blocker. So Rucci's very, very, this is where Penn State's 6, 7, 8 deep on the offensive line. You're like, okay, Rucci comes in. Donko's a loss. It still is a loss for them. And then on the defensive line, Hakeem Beamon left the program. Alonzo Ford now, long-term injury, out for Penn State. You're starting to get a little thin on your defensive front, a front where they do like to rotate as well. So it will mean increased snaps for guys like Kozai Izzard for Penn State. So you don't want to suffer any more injuries in key spots this weekend against Maryland as well, assuming you're going to take care of business.
You are absolutely right about that. Speaking of taking care of business here, USC, they do host Notre Dame. They can play spoiler here as the Irish do come in looking to have a home game. They're 10-1 so far. Notre Dame, 7.5-point favorites on the road at USC. Trip. USC maybe get a signature victory?
Man, I'm really interested in this one. I just don't. I really feel like I should believe and buy into Notre Dame, but they haven't been tested. The last close game Notre Dame played was on September 28th, the 31-24 win against Louisville. The 3 teams to have success against Notre Dame this year, running the football, are Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, and Louisville. The 3 close games they've played, all teams have run at 3.7 yards per carry or better against that Notre Dame defense. It's a defense that is incredible against the pass. It's still really good against the run, but not as good against the run as the pass. So this is where Lincoln Riley has to use the legs of Jaden Mayava and his running game against Al Golden's Notre Dame defense. If Lincoln Riley can call some running plays, I feel like USC at home has an opportunity to hang in this game with something to prove against Notre Dame. I think USC has had an underwhelming year, but if you look at their games, they've been competitive. It's been underwhelming. The results aren't there, but they've been competitive. I don't see Notre Dame going in there and blowing them out. I think Notre Dame wins, but I think it's going to be close, and I think they're going to be sweating in South Bend.
I agree. I think they win 27-20, cover the spread of 7.5. In part, because number one, all USC does is
Excuse me? 27-20 does not cover a 7.5-point spread. Do your math, bud.
Yeah, USC covers the spread.
Oh, USC? I thought you meant Notre Dame covering the
no, sorry.
You said they win 27-20 and cover the spread.
You know what? You're right. In my head, I was thinking.
I just want clarity for the still enrolled podcast listeners here?
There's a lot going on in this brand. I know you think that
We
it's
know.
pretty empty and
We
it's going a
know.
mile a minute. But yeah, I was thinking, oh yeah, of course, everyone knows in my head that USC is going to cover. So when I say they're going to cover, yes, thank you for that. Thank you for clearing.
Nope, just want to clarify.
27-20, Notre Dame wins, USC covers. In large part, that's all USC does. They played 10 so far Power 4 opponents this year, Trip. 8 out of the 10 have finished in one-score games. Winning or losing, USC finds a way to always make things close.
That's
I'll give
the talent.
Right.
That's because they have talent. They have talent. They have talent at wide receiver. They have talent at running back. They have talent at quarterback. They have talent on the line. And D'Anton Lynn has elevated that defense, a defense that last year allowed 34.5 points per game. They're only allowing 21 points per game. And when you have a defense that's in the top, 35, they're 31st nationally. When you have a defense that's holding opponents to 21 points per game, you're going to be in the games. And that's the difference when, even if your offense isn't where you want it, that defense for USC has allowed them to be competitive. That's a huge tip of the cap to D'Anton Lynn. And that's why I think USC is really dangerous moving forward, because they have it defensively. They've gotten it fixed. You got to assume that offensively, they're going to get this thing figured out. And the end of game situations, they're going to figure out.
What they have done this year, too, is they've played up to their opponents, and they've also played down to their opponents as well. So I think you can expect a good USC outcome. And the one thing I'll say about the Notre Dame pass defense, it is number one in the country, but kind of go back to what you said. You mentioned the Louisville game. That's the last, good passing attack they've played. They played Georgia Tech. They played Army, Navy, Virginia. They're not getting – so it's it looks good, but I think USC can have talent passing the ball because they have talent.
Even Northern Illinois, they're going to run the ball. Texas A&M's a running team.
Right. Yeah. Right. They're number one almost by default.
They play the academies. They play the academies.
That's the football.
They play triple option teams.
Their best corner, Benjamin Morrison, he's been out for a while, so that's not a new injury, but he was their top corner. So that's, again, this is by far the best talent.
You're talking me into Southern California here.
I can't trust Lincoln Riley late. I can't. I think Notre Dame does out execute and win, but I think again USC covers the 7.5 point spread. They do play it close here in the Coliseum.
A game Nicole Auerbach will be watching closely.
Oh, I'm sure she will, and I'm sure she will definitely take the Penn State USC result and the Notre Dame USC result, and I'm sure if it's in her favor for Notre Dame,
games that take place 2 months apart when the entire complexion of the season has changed and teams have changed. Yeah, we should measure what was the score against a common opponent. Cool.
This one will be interesting here in East Lansing. Michigan State looking to get bowl eligible at 5-6. A near disaster last week.
Hold on. Can we just talk about the tweet that we're referring to as Nicole? And I think she's good. I mean, I respect her and what she covers the league. I think she's good. But to say, I guess will she just forgive Notre Dame for their loss to NIU now? Forgive their loss. Yep.
You tweeted that?
That's the tweet that
it wasn't sarcastic?
No. Let me read. Let me read you.
Doing?
Hold on. I gotta find it now. The pressure's on.
While you find it, I want to say this because I think it's not just her. There is a recency bias in college football when it comes to these rankings that September just can't not exist. You can't forget what happened. Has Notre Dame played a lot better since the NIU loss? They absolutely have. But can we now just pretend because they beat Army by 1,000,000 points that the NIU loss never happened? No, it's part of the resume. They're going to get in, but to think that all of a sudden we should forget it never happened is absurd.
Yeah, and I don't want to put this one on her, but here's what she said. Some thoughts heading into tonight's rankings. I think it's time for the committee to flip Notre Dame and Penn State. Committee, not her, but committee has already forgiven the NIU loss. Now we should reward the Irish wins. Forgiven? Excuse me?
If they forgave the NIU loss, Notre Dame is probably above Texas. They may even be above, well, not Ohio State. They'd be right behind Ohio State. And again, what?
What are we?
They've only moved up in part because teams have lost. That A&M win has gotten better as time goes on.
Okay, but then we should forgive those losses too.
But that's
to forgive losses is the most. I think the only situation in which you can. I think ultimately you are what your record is, and I've been pretty firm in that. If you have a star quarterback, the most important position on the field injured for 1 week and doesn't play, and that game is a anomaly from the rest of the games, that is why we have a committee for those types of situations. Or there's something crazy happens and you lose the game, bad call, bad injury, back and forth, can't believe it went that way, crazy Hail Mary scenario. That's why we have a committee to say, you know what, you lost the game, but this one is kind of weird. It stands out. Something freaky happened. I don't want to say forgive, but we're going to give you a benefit of the doubt there. Notre Dame had all of its puzzle pieces when they lost at home to a middle-tier MAC team.
Who's not been
We
good
don't just
since.
forget it happened. We don't.
Why don't we just forgive Ohio State's loss to Oregon? Put them number one.
Yeah.
You know, like they just beat Indiana. Why are the Buckeyes at 2? Why isn't the committee forgiving their loss? Like we can play that with everybody outside of Oregon because everyone else is lost. That's
stupid.
By the way, if you are Penn State fan listening, you don't have to. Notre Dame's not jumping them. I don't care what happens at USC. As long as Penn State doesn't lose to Maryland, you will see Notre Dame 4 and Notre Dame 5. Last week was a chance to flip them. If you want to say, oh, they beat Army, impressive. Penn State barely got by Minnesota. This Tuesday was the time to flip those two. They didn't do it, which tells you they're not going to flip them. So despite what Nicole says and the forgiveness all of a sudden now that you want to give her on the holidays, look, families can forgive each other. You're not forgiving the Notre Dame loss to NIU. That's for sure.
This isn't OJ. This is college football. Rutgers at Michigan State. Rutgers 6-5, 3-5 in the Big Ten. Michigan State 5-6 overall, 3-5 in the Big Ten. 3:30 on FS1. Michigan State 1.5 favorite at home to get to bowl eligibility. Could they become the 13th Big Ten team to get bowl eligible? I like Rutgers in this game on the road against Michigan State. I think Michigan State's just been so inconsistent this year, and Rutgers has played better the last couple of weeks.
They have. Outside for a fourth down defensive meltdown. They should have beat Illinois. They beat Minnesota recently. They're playing. I'm with you. And Michigan State, look, I was honestly getting ready to sing their praises after they're up. Again, it's Purdue, but a great first half last Friday night. And all of a sudden, to just completely go into neutral, 73 yards on offense in the entire second half. Should have honestly gave the game away. Should have lost to Purdue. At home, got lucky. I don't like where the momentum is going. I don't like how this team, like you said, is too inconsistent. I like Rutgers on the road. They're playing good football. I don't think, even though I'm sure Jonathan Smith's going to have those guys ready to play with a sense of urgency, I like Rutgers here as well. By the way, Spartans, they did get their first sack right in 7 games last week against Purdue. Rutgers has been a very good team in terms of keeping their quarterback upright, only 16 sacks. I don't think all of a sudden you'll see a rejuvenation here of the Spartans defensive line getting pressure. Give me Rutgers.
The disappointment with that Rutgers offensive line is they haven't really paved the way in the run game as much as everyone thought they would this year. They've been good in pass protection, but it hasn't been a dominant run line like many thought it would be with Monungai.
3 quick ones here, Trip, to wrap it up. Fresno State at UCLA. UCLA's bowl hopes gone after the loss last week to USC. UCLA almost 10-point favorites at home here. Momentum is still. I think you got to finish strong. You can't lose to Fresno State.
I think let's shout out Sturdivant, right? 5 catches, 117 yards against USC, 3 games of 25 plus. He is their big play threat in the pass game. He's got great speed. I was watching him warm up when UCLA was at Penn State. That guy can run. That guy can run. He is their big play threat. Shout out to him. I like UCLA in this game. Not sure why. I honestly don't really care, but I like UCLA in this game.
I do as well. How about this, though? Fresno State has owned this series.
Yeah, that's wild.
4 in a row. The last UCLA win over Fresno State was 2000 when Deshaun Foster was literally a player. I think they break that streak. I'm with you. I think Deshaun Foster does it.
That's wild.
UCLA 5.
Deshaun Foster and Tim Skipper both played in that game.
Crazy. That is cool. That is kind of cool.
That's cool. That's really cool. I shouldn't have said I don't care. I do care.
That is fun. That is fun. Good for UCLA here. I'm sure the Rose Bowl will be packed. Purdue 1-10 on the season. The old Oaken bucket on the line here. Is there any hangover concern for you, Trip, after last week's debacle in the horseshoe? Right now, Indiana at home, essentially just shy 30-point favorites, the biggest spread so far in the Big Ten this week.
This could be sold out. Great environment. Night game in Bloomington. Really, really cold night game in Bloomington. I think Indiana's defensive line gets pressure against Purdue. I think Rourke plays a good game. I just think Indiana. This is a game that Indiana's more talented, better coached. They've got all the pieces. I think they cover the 29.5-point spread. I love that this is Indiana. As you put the nugget on there, I think Ryan Walters, I think Purdue needs to move on from Ryan Walters. But it said on 3 report this week, trending towards returning in 2025. When you lose to your rival by 40 plus on Saturday, we'll see if that changes.
I was just about to say the keyword trending. If it's 51-3, I would agree. Maybe all of a sudden Ryan Walters, maybe that key card doesn't work on Monday. I think we'll see a similar score. I don't think you got to worry about a hangover. I think Kirk Cincinnati will have these guys ready to play. I think they take care of business immediately, and I think you see a waxing in Bloomington here as Indiana does win for the first time. Purdue has had success recently. Again, both programs are they are, but Indiana's yet to win this rivalry game since 2019. That does change here on Saturday. Speaking of struggling to win, Trip, final game we got. Washington at number 1 Oregon. Dan Lanning, Owen, this is crazy. Dan Lanning in his time in Oregon, 33-2 against everybody not named Washington. Against the Huskies, 0-3. NBC, 7:30 p.m. Eastern kick. Oregon, 19.5-point favorites. Can Lanning finally get the monkey off his back here and beat UW for the first time in his career?
It's impressive that Oregon's been as dominant as they have been as well. You know, I know they had the Wisconsin game in there, had beat Ohio State by 1, but they've had some injuries throughout the course of the season, but they have not let that derail them. Tez Johnson posted on Instagram last week. He's back. Jordan Birch, game time decision. Marcus Harper, game time decision. I think if this game's in Seattle, maybe you talk about Oregon getting pushed a little bit. With this game in Eugene, I think Oregon cements itself as the number 1 seed in the playoff. It'll be Oregon and Ohio State for the Big Ten championship. And I think they go into that Big Ten championship game undefeated. And they'll be left standing unbeaten after this.
Yeah, here's the problem for Washington. Kalen DeBoer ain't walking through that door. Michael Penix Jr. ain't walking through that door. Even Roma Dunze ain't walking through that door. I'm with you. I think
they don't
Oregon
have the talent
here
this year.
No. And we've talked about before, right? Washington at home versus on the road, 2 separate teams. Now, you're not flying across the country, right? It's a short trip here, a trip you're used to making. With that said, totally different team. Atmosphere should be juiced up in Autzen. I think Oregon wins, covers the 20-point spread here. I think they do cruise. I like that fact that you read Tez Johnson's Instagram post in the voice that he wanted it to be said. He's back. Although Dan Lanning did say this week, you'll see if he's back on Saturday if he's on the field tonight. He won't give any information away, but I think that gives it away right there.
And we don't have to worry about you napping through college football. No tryptophan for you.
That's right. That's right. No turkey, no problem. We'll be locked in, dialed in, ready to go. You enjoy the
No weddings. No weddings on
weddings.
Thanksgiving weekend.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness for that. And hopefully
next
no family
time
feuding as well.
Oh, yeah. If there was going to be a family feud I'm assuming you're at your house or you're going to Lawrence?
My house, my family.
Yeah. What would the battle be in the Hickey household? Who would it be between? You, your sister, mom, dad, aunts, uncles?
Yeah, we're competitive. Yeah.
Well,
a lot of the Hickeys, we're pretty soft.
Well, unlike you, she was a Division I athlete.
Well, look, I tried out for a Division I team. I didn't make it, but I was on the field.
Tell the story again.
Tried out for Penn State my freshman year, 2012, and Bill O'Brien was the coach. That was the sanction. So I figured, okay, Penn State needs some bodies to play receiver in high school. Going to go to the open tryout, run-ons, as they call them at Penn State, not walk-ons, run-ons. And as we're doing receiver drills, I'm the first one up. Quarterback throws a pass to me, easy pass, right through my hands, hits Bill O'Brien in the foot. Let's just say I never got a call back for the team. I didn't make it.
Did you know at that moment this is over?
Oh, I mean, I knew before. We ran a 40, did some like conditioning drills, and I'm like, I'm not fast, I'm not strong, so I knew I had no chance there. The only chance was going to be just dazzling, catching every ball. First pass, immediately. All right, I'm done. I should have honestly just walked off the field. I don't know why I stayed around. I couldn't catch a ball after that, by the way. Mentally broken. Mentally cooked.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you weren't done after the 40, after the conditioning drills. They saw chicken legs walk through the door, and they said, he's got no chance to play Division I.
It's genetics. All right. I do calf raises. I used to back in the days do some squats. I don't avoid leg day. It's not my fault. All right. I'm not a genetic freak. I blame you know what? You're right. I didn't get cut because of my bad skill. I got cut because of bad genetics. Thanks, mom and dad. You screwed me. You never gave me a shot from the start. Then, you know, that's what we're going to bring that up at Thanksgiving. There we go. We'll start a fight that way.
Next time we talk, we'll be talking championships.
Yes.
And we'll be done with the regular season. It's in the books.
crazy. And we'll now start to see optimism or lack thereof for some programs as we start to look ahead to the 2025 season here as well. But conference championship weekend is upon us because the last week of the regular season is here. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Really, as a time to be thankful for Trip and I. Thank you for taking some time here. There's a lot of choices you can make. Thank you for spending some time here, either listening to the pod, watching the pod, interacting with us. We do appreciate it here. And our growth is because of you.
Yeah, drive safe if you're listening to this on the roads. Drive safe, travel safe, have a safe, happy, healthy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the college football, and we do appreciate our audience that has grown incrementally the last couple of weeks.
Enjoy the holidays. We will talk to you on Monday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.